Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Hubble. I'm assistant professor of kinesiology at Delaware State, and I'm a little nervous, so I'm probably going to talk fast. So hopefully that's good news for you. You won't have to listen to me as long, right? So get ready for the best 10 to 15-minute nap you've had this week because you're going to need it to get to the weekend. All right, so I'm going to talk about assessing and improving posture stability in Parkinson's disease because that is the theme of my research. So, for those of you that don't know about Parkinson's disease, it's characterized by non-motor and motor symptoms. And I'm a movement scientist, so I focus on the motor symptoms. And they have symptoms such as tremor. So they have tremor in, say, the hands, the legs. They can have tremor in the jaw. They have slower gait. They take shorter steps. And they may have what's called freezing of gait, where they try to walk, they try to initiate, but they freeze. So that the automaticity of their gait is reduced. Dopa replaces dopamine that's no longer being produced in the basal ganglia. There's mixed results when it comes to posture stability, and this is systematic evidence. So even though the movement is improved and larger, it may not necessarily be stable. So we want to make sure that if we're going to increase their movement, we want to make sure their movement is stable as well, because we want to reduce falls and reduce that fall rate. And one thing we do know that in general, exercise that's focused specifically for balance and stability is effective for improving balance in Parkinson's. Right. So what I started looking at was looking at a lot of the clinical tests that were used to try and indicate mobility and stability and balance in Parkinson's, and how they were used. Things like the timed up and go test, which you may have heard before, the TUG, timed up and go, where they just stand up, walk 7 feet, turn around, come back, sit down. 10-meter walk test, walking 10 meters. Activity-specific balance confidence is a questionnaire where they report their balance confidence on different scenarios. The gait and falls questionnaire, they report data on their gait and falls history. The UPDRS motor section, so the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale for disease severity, has a motor section, and in the subscore, they have a retropulsion test where the clinician just pulls backwards on the shoulders of the patient, and they're looking for a postural response. And a lot of these tests are subjective. So timed up and go and 10-meter walk is not as subjective because it's time-based, but your questionnaires are self-reported. So they're not as reliable because some people may not report accurately on there. The retropulsion test is a 0 or a 1. Do you have a postural response? So if a patient has been exercising and training for a year, well, how do you really know they've improved? Hey, it's great you got responses, but have we improved? And clinicians, your neurologist and your medical professionals, they've only got 15 to 30 minutes to see a patient. They don't have the time that movement scientists have, such as myself, to spend an hour or two in a lab to test people. So my goal is to supplement clinicians to help them improve their assessment of their patients, specifically posture stability. And then I want to look at what technology is the best, and wearable sensors I think are some of the best technology to use. And then do the interventions, are they able to change these measures? Can these measures actually detect the changes following intervention? So I did an initial review. So this is from 10 years ago. And I looked at when wearable sensors were starting to get big. And I looked at what types of sensors are being used, where were they being placed, what measures or variables were being calculated for stability, right? What do they mean? And the initial search was pretty broad. I just looked for wearable sensors, testing stability in Parkinson's, and very like a general search. I had 34 papers, which we whittled down to 26. And what we found was in that initial review that accelerometers in 69% of the studies were used. Inertial sensors were in 27% of the studies, and then other types of sensors were used in other studies. Well, to be fair, inertial sensors have accelerometers and gyroscopes which give rotational data, and the accelerometer is linear data. So the inertial sensor is more expensive. So at the time, my thoughts are the accelerometers were chosen because they're cheaper than the inertial sensors because they don't have the dual technology. So the gait studies were pulling the accelerometer data from the inertial sensors anyway. And they were placed on the trunk and head. So if you're looking at total body stability, we're looking at accelerations of the trunk and head. But if they were looking at symmetry between the arms and the legs, they were placed on the arms and legs. And for most of the measures, total body measures, harmonic ratio, root mean square, and stride variability were the three most commonly used measures. 26 studies, more than 26 measures. Harmonic ratio was used in 8 of those studies, and all 8 times they detected differences. And the differences were between Parkinson's, on medication and off medication, Parkinson's with and without stimulation, Parkinson's versus a control, Parkinson fallers versus non-fallers. All these types of comparisons were included. So then what I did was I then recruited some participants and said, okay, so now that we know in the literature, accelerometers are used on the head and trunk, and the harmonic ratio seems to be the most commonly used assessment of total body movement smoothness, let's link it and see if it's related to some of these clinical variables that I was seeing in the research. So, some basic demographics. I looked at clinical mobility, time up and go, 6-meter walk test. We collected 12 months retrospective falls data. We collected activity-specific balance confidence, PD gait and falls. And then we assessed walking gait, simply walking 10 meters. And we calculated the harmonic ratios. And we did bivariate correlations to see were these harmonic ratios, measures of total body movement, smoothness, and regularity, were they related to these clinical measures? And then what we found was it was the 6-meter walk test, the retrospective falls reporting, and the gait and falls questionnaire had a low to moderate relationship with stability measures. So I consider very low 0 to 0.2, 0.2 to 0.4 is low, and then I consider 0.4 to 0.6 moderate, 0.6 to 0.8 high, and then 0.8 to 1 correlation very high. So there is some kind of moderate, and I've included a range here, negative 0.44 to negative 0.62. Also, the more falls that someone reported, they had lower harmonic ratios, and lower harmonic ratios indicate poor movement, smoothness, and stability. Oh, and on the 6-meter walk test, we had a low positive relationship. Also, better performance on the 6-meter walk test led to higher harmonic ratios and, in essence, higher stability. But a more clinical test like the timed up and go may not necessarily provide insight into your movement smoothness. So your clinical tests such as 6-meter walk, gait and falls, and retrospective falls tended to provide a moderate insight into a link with harmonic ratios. So even though we have weak to moderate relationships at best, we still need to test these objective clinical measures of stability and see where they can go from here. So next is the updated review. And I started this 3 years ago to update the original review. Because the original review really only had acute types of interventions. So it had some medicine-based or on versus off medication, and it had stimulation on versus off, but it didn't have any of the other interventions I read about. And